right, everybody, we're going to just go ahead and get started. We know that there's a lot going on currently in the world right now. And so folks are either, engaging in rallies or taking moments to just reflect and read up on the situation happening with the Supreme Court currently. So we're going to be cognizant of that as we move forward with this discussion. And we will discuss it a bit while we're in the meeting as well. But to get started, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. My name is Jamila Green, and I have the honor of serving as the Community Engagement Manager for YWCA Central Carolinas and Charlotte, North Carolina. Yes, the Queen City. And I am happy to help with organizing this panel on doulas and midwives and their important work when it comes to racial and reproductive justice in not only this community, but beyond. And this event is an event that is a part of our Stand Against Racism series of virtual events. And if you didn't know, Stand Against Racism is a national campaign that brings awareness to racism within our communities and connects with other activists and allies to build pathways towards racial equity and justice. So we've had our first panel, which was last week. Actually, our first kind of workshop that we had was last week, and it was on living wage with our friends at Just Economics, so Vicki Meath. So glad to have connected with her on that. And this week, we have the honor of being in the presence of amazing folks related to reproductive justice, whether they're doulas or they do amazing work within organizations that focus on reproductive justice. We're amongst good folks, okay? So I'm so excited to go ahead and get started. Before I get started, I would like to say thank you to the attendees, those who are here, as well as to our sponsors, Google Fiber and Corning, for supporting our mission and allowing us to do this great work on the Stand Against Racism 2022. So before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to first start off by asking each of you all, First, we need to make sure that our attendees know to please use the Q&A function that will be on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And that will allow us to have the community conversation at the end of our event. So about 45 minutes in, 30 to 45 minutes in, we're gonna kind of pause on our conversation and we're gonna go into questions that folks, our attendees may have. So please feel free to use that function throughout this conversation. Again, that's the Q&A function. Just pop your question in there and then we'll be able to see it and then we'll answer it at the end of the session. So now go back to where I was before. All right, let's get started with a question that I think basically all of you all can answer, and you're going to answer it very well. Can you tell us your name and give us tell us why you decided to go into this work specifically? So we can start with Nala.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Fairley, but I go by Nala. I have been a doula now, it'll be 2 years in November. I started over time, the list has grown, but I've started initially because of the birth with my son who just turned 3. I was really inspired by it to, I love the feeling of giving birth, and I was happy about how I felt afterwards. I felt very empowered. I felt like I was invincible. I can do any and everything. And I wanted to be the person that was at every person's side that felt that same way during that time. So I knew that being a OB or a midwife or a labor and delivery nurse was not meant for me because I wanted to build a personal relationship within that time. So that's what helped me become a doula. I also realized that my ideal clients are teen moms. And that was one thing I added on to it recently, because my best friend was a teen mom. And I think she's one of the most amazing mothers I ever met in my life. She's a single mother and she's been doing amazing since day one. And they just have like a soft spot in my heart. So that was my starting reason, but I've learned that my reason continues to grow. So I don't know how long I'm gonna be here, but I know it's gonna be a long journey and I'm excited for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How about Maya?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Maya. I use any pronouns, and I am with Sister Song, and I'm based in Durham, North Carolina. I identify as a mixed race, Black, queer mama, postpartum doula, birth worker, and reproductive justice organizer. Um, and I truly just stumbled upon a doula training led by the YWCA, Brandy from the YWCA in Greensboro, back in 2019, I believe. And it just made so much sense for me in that moment because I've always identified so strongly as a caretaker and this like nurturing person. I always was the babysitter growing up, and knew I wanted to be a mom, but I never understood how like caretaking work and mothering was related to my other interests. And when I took the doula training and became familiar with the reproductive justice framework, I recognized the ways that birthing, mothering, parenting, and caretaking are actually all really political revolutionary acts, that I think are often sort of undermined and not given the attention and celebration that it deserves. So that's what brought me here. That's what initially led me to a birth doula training. And then once I gave birth myself, I actually am shifting a little bit more towards postpartum support, because that's from my personal experience. I was ready for birth and not ready for postpartum. So that's where I'm at now.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya. I love that you said that it's a revolutionary act because it really truly is a revolutionary act. And Nala, when she was speaking about feeling invincible, it's those same feelings, I'm sure. Awesome. And Jaden, can you share a little bit?
Hey, my name is Jaden Milner. I have been a birth doula since September of 2020. And I initially got into this work after supporting my best friend during her pregnancy and labor. I was sort of like her doula before I even really knew what that was. Her experience resulted in what I know now is an unnecessary induction, which led to emergency C-section. And that was really hard for her. And me not knowing at the time like what was really going on made me like step back and like I just felt like I wanted to support more than I could. And really this whole thing for me really just feels like a full circle because I've always been interested in like our bodies and birthing and stuff like that. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jaden. And then last but not least, Chevette.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chevette, pronoun she, her. I have been a doula since 2017. I got started with, like Maya, with the YWCA Greensboro, and I fell in love with the programs that they have, the Teen Families Reading Together program, their Teen Mom Mentorship program. They have so many different programs that I love. That's why I completely love the YWCA and all the work that is continually being done. So I kind of started from there. Even at a young age, I was watching Birthday Story on TLC. I just loved birth. It was just my thing. And so I developed into that. Once I graduated from school, I started working with March of Dimes. So learning more about policy work, nonprofit work with moms and babies and fighting for moms and babies. Now I currently work with the CDC Foundation, doing emergency response care here in North Carolina regarding COVID. So just learning different aspects of things. And especially since I work now with jail health, I'm learning more about what, correctional facilities are doing when it comes to maternal health. So that's where I'm at. And I am hopefully starting a career switch soon with going more into detail with maternal and child health and with midwifery.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Chevette. And before we get started, I think we need to lay the groundwork and lay some foundational kind of definitions to the terms doula and midwife. So if possible, Maya, could you define what a doula is and what a midwife is? And I think some people think it can be used interchangeably, but the work that they do is separate in nature to an extent. So I would love if you could define that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start out, and if other folks want to add on, please do. And to be clear, I am a doula and not a midwife. I've experienced both with my own birthing experience with midwives and doulas. But from my understanding, we define doulas as really advocates and support folks for birthing people who can provide physical, informational, and emotional support, but very much cannot engage like medically or beyond those three types of support. So, the midwife or the OB is going to be the one checking your heart rate, measuring your cervical dilation, things like that. But the doula is really there to advocate for the person giving birth and any support people they have with them in the room, and just making sure things that the birthing person is being heard, listened to, respected, and then any sort of advice. The doula can also be super useful for the partner, whoever else is involved, and giving them ways that they can support the birthing person. That's how I would define it, but welcome other folks to add to that too.
Yeah, definitely. If anybody else wants to hop in, please feel free.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like support versus medical intervention. I feel like that's like that clear divide between the two fields. So it's perfect.
Awesome.
I did just want to add,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead. No, please go ahead, Nala.
No, I just wanted to add that the difference between a doula and a midwife that I like people to understand is that the doula, you hire your doula, you personally choose your doula, and you do the same as midwife, but your doula is connected to you strictly. The midwife is directed to the hospital or the OB. So in order for a decision to be made, the doula comes to you. Otherwise, with a midwife, they will go to the OB or the hospital.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It seems like it's more of an intentional kind of decision that you're making for yourself when you do lock in with a doula, or even if you lock in with a midwife, though it has that different kind of medical kind of foundation related to a midwife, it's another form of support as well. All right. Does anybody else want to share anything else before we hop into the next question? All right, cool. All right. So the next question I have is, we'll give a little bit of information first. According to ProPublica, an article that I recently read, America is considered one of the most dangerous places to give birth, especially for those birthing of color. And Jaden, I wanted to get your perspective on that specific kind of information. It's kind of gut wrenching. And if anybody wants to jump in afterwards, feel free.
Definitely is. I think it's just really with how America, there's like constant control over women's bodies, and especially over women of color. And it's been that way, as we know, unfortunately, for centuries. With the maternal mortality rate, it's rising here in America, but it's also declining in other countries. And I personally think maybe we should just humble ourselves as a country and take notes from the other countries and stop trying to make a natural part of life so medical.
That's a very powerful statement. Stop trying to make something so natural medical. That's very powerful. Does anybody else want to share their perspective?
Go ahead, Shvet. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go first. You unmuted first.
Okay. As Jaden mentioned, like, how birth has become so medicalized, it wasn't always like this, and the statistics were not always like this. And so I just always like to highlight that Black folks in particular, when it comes to birth, have always supported one another and shown up and provided the care that is now become medicalized. Birth used to be this really sacred and communal practice that was just done in our own homes and our own communities. And I think it was in the early 1900s when I'm losing the language, but essentially birth became institutionalized and is now sort of, we think of like this sterile, cold, dark hospital room where you're alone and you don't have support. And it's a secret, and you know, you're expected to just like jump out of bed the next day and go back to work, and it's like this hidden sort of thing when it used to be so communal and celebrated, and people would bring you food and check in on you. So I just like to highlight that it hasn't always been like this, and the rates of maternal mortality were much lower when it was a community practice.
Absolutely. I want to hop on that bandwagon. If you look at the statistics now, like according to the CDC, 50,000 women each year experience life-threatening pregnancy-related complications. And according to the CDC as well, 700, birthing people die during childbirth every year. A lot of these things are preventable. And it really comes down to, looking at the system, the medicalization of the system, like Maya said, the implicit bias that is being experienced by women of color, birthing people of color, when they're not being believed, when they're in pain, when they're in discomfort, when they need additional checks or examinations, even when it comes to getting the things that they need. I have a friend who is currently pregnant and is one of my clients who'll be having a baby soon. And, having a doctor say, oh, this is covered by your insurance, but this isn't covered by your insurance, so you're going to have to pull out of pocket. That's a lot. Some of these things are a lot of money, and they're not covered by mainstream health insurance or Medicaid or other things like that. And so when you think about having, a household where you're having to, decide, how am I going to pay for this additional, ultrasound? Or how am I going to pay for this additional service that I need for my child? These are things that we're dealing with a lot. And that's why it's making it, even more dangerous for people of color, because we're constantly thinking about all these different things and the impact of what that looks like on us and our babies.
Very, very good points made. Is anybody else want to share?
I just wanted to also add on, I'm actually about to go into researching more of other cultures and everything. But I know in America, white coat syndrome is a very serious thing as well, especially being Black in America. So I truly believe that a lot of things go missed and unknown that can be taken care of because of the fact of we don't believe or trust the providers to actually listen to what we're saying. We don't trust them to share whatever pains or aches we're going through. And then if they do, like, we don't want to just take whatever medication they throw at us while we're pregnant. So I think it's also because of just that mistrust. You can't trust who supposed to be there, support you, and take care of you. And in the end, unfortunately, it leads to death.
That's a very good point. And white coat syndrome, for folks who may not know, can you define what white coat syndrome is?
Actual definition.
So, or just even
no,
like, not
I was
even
thinking,
a
I'm trying to think
description, or even like an example, so that folks kind
I'll
of
say
get an idea.
An example is just, so I believe the main thing behind it is more so you just believe that the doctor is more educated than you, that you should never question anything they do, that they say. So because they have that title of a doctor, they wear that white coat. It's like you're beneath them in a way. So you automatically fear and just go whatever yes and no they say to, instead of putting your own voice and opinion to it and just letting them know what's really going on, when you have to keep in mind that they work for you. No matter how they make it seem, they're here to serve you. And that's the ideal of how you should keep the mindset in order to get what you need and what you deserve.
That's a great point. Thank you so much. That's exactly what I needed, because I was like, somebody might not know what that means. That's perfect example. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next question, if that's cool with everybody here. And again, to the folks that are our attendees, please take a second and pop your questions into the Q&A section. If you have any questions, like I said, we're trying to use a new function this time that's a little different than what we would normally use. But if you use that Q&A function, we're able to see those questions faster and able to get through them quicker, so that everybody can get the information that they are looking for. All right, so there seems to be like a more public wave of individuals tapping into services, doula services and midwife services. for care during, before, after, when it comes to birthing. But I know somebody else even spoke about, one of our panelists even spoke about even with and having an abortion doula. So thinking about ways in which these doulas are used and utilized for various focuses related to reproductive health. And recently I actually read about a resurgence of folks, Mexican Americans in Arizona, looking to tap more into doula and midwife services for the sake of that community does not always feel safe going to doctor's offices. So they're looking into tapping into those things that their ancestors did a long time ago for the sake of that community's health, along with indigenous folks as well. So historically, doulas and midwives served as pillars in healthcare. And when it came to feeling safe and heard in intimate spaces, are there any parallels in today's doulas and midwives as the former ones? So when I think about doulas and midwives, I think about like my grandfather being birthed by like a great great grandmother in a house. And that story is something that is told across families, families of color specifically. So do you think there are parallels in that energy from then to now at all? And I'll leave that to anybody to answer.
So I would say yes, there are definitely, if you think about before and now, I'll say there are parallels. I think about how there were granny midwives in the South. I think about how birth has always kind of been a spiritual practice within the Black community, within the African American community. Being able to have this time in a house to give birth, to have your grandmother, your aunt, everybody around you, surrounding you and cheering you on to have a baby and say, we've been through this, before, and now it's your turn to have that experience. I definitely think it was more of that experience before. And I feel like it is now, but in a sense, it's different. Like we talked about, again, the medicalization of birth makes it a little bit more difficult, but now you have doulas kind of breaking those barriers and breaking down those things and saying, no, we need to go back to the roots, as TLC said, the rivers and the lakes that we're used to. That's what we need to do when it comes to birth. And so you see that doulas are coming in, they're having these conversations, they're providing that education, that relationship, that experience, that spiritual and bonding experience with their clients. And so that way they're not feeling so scared. Nala talked about the white coat syndrome, being in a cold room, you know what I mean? The only thing you can do is dim the lights. There's all these lights shining on you when you're having a baby. It's very intimidating. That whole experience is very intimidating. So to have somebody there to hold your hands, to be there to comfort you in that time, is very important. And that's where I can see the similarities between, history and now, is to see that comforting, that hand-holding, that encouragement. But I will say there's more fear now. It's more dangerous to have a baby now. It's more dangerous to give birth. So I feel like it makes the doula even more important now than ever, to make sure that we can fight through these barriers and these terrible statistics that are happening to women these days. So I definitely think that's important. And when it comes to midwives, the midwifery scope of care versus obstetrics is different, because one thing when it comes to midwifery is they have a more hands-on approach than obstetricians. They have their own scope of care where they see the client as the person responsible for her own health, for her own well-being, as opposed to in obstetrics, it's that the doctor is responsible. The doctor is responsible. So thinking of for the whole experience. And I think that kind of is a disconnect, because it's like, well, what the doctor wants, the doctor's going to get, versus what the client, the patient needs and desires in that room at that moment. And I think with midwifery, it cuts through that to really have that bonding experience. And I feel like it's it's a little bit more difficult for them in the sense that they're not doulas. So we have the opportunity to support, uplift, encourage, provide information, educate, even mitigate certain situations that we end up coming into. With a midwife, yes, they can have that hands-on experience, that nurturing experience, but at the end of the day, they are there for medical supports. So there's a limit to how far they can go, that they don't reach the level of what us as doulas do while we're doing it. So I definitely think that having a doula and a midwife is a great combination, because you have both people really seeing you as an individual to really go through this birthing experience together, and kind of breaking down that barrier of medicalization that we have when it comes to obstetrics, where there's a time clock. Push that Pitocin, get that baby out. No, you're walking too much, we need that fetal monitor on you. Those things make it more traumatic, make it more stressful. And so that's why I see that as doulas, we're able to be in the middle of that, to cut through that noise. But I'm gonna be quiet now.
No, I love it. Go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, that was absolutely perfect. To reiterate and go off of that, I think doulas today and how we're seeing them gaining much more public attention, to me seems very much so like a direct response to the Black maternal health crisis, in a way that feels different than what I understand of doulas and granny midwives, but I think still serving the same purpose of like really holding on to our like generational roots and our ancestors who have done this work, and passing it through the lineage. And then also, I think I've seen like there's much more like specialization now in doulas that I think too are like meeting the need of what we're seeing. So, and I saw someone ask this in the chat too, but I'm sure there's many more than I'm familiar with, but there's birth doulas, postpartum doulas, there are fertility doulas. I've heard of sibling doulas to like help support siblings make transit when they're transitioning and having younger siblings come in. And I know there's folks who specifically seek out supporting queer and trans people who give birth. So it's really there's like, yeah, I've just seen a lot more like focused on specific populations when it comes to doula care today.
Yeah, I love that. Would anybody else like to share, Jaden or Nala?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that I see the connection more through postpartum doulas than I do in birth doulas. I am a birth doula. I'm actually in training to be full spectrum, but that means full spectrum is fertility, abortion, birth and postpartum. But I say more postpartum because with me I have had clients where their families are just there. They're just in the room and they expect me to do everything. They're just kind of there to take the space, but they're not really being any actual help. So I do see a parallel in that, as me filling in that space as the doula, but I see it more in postpartum because I believe postpartum shows more of that it takes a village idea of it. Usually with postpartum, they're there to be that mental, of course, the mental, emotional, and spiritual support, but it's more of that, let me just fully cater to you type of thing. Like, I know there's a newborn, beautiful baby here, but let's focus on the person that gave birth to it. And I feel like that's something that has been lost, because even when you go to your appointments now, they're not really asking, oh, how are you feeling? They're asking more of like, did you feel anything abnormal, mainly because of the baby type of thing. It's not really focused on your health. And I feel like it's kind of hard to separate the two. It's easier to separate the two after the baby is born. It's like, oh my God, the baby is new, beautiful, innocent, fragile. Let's protect the baby. But it's like, you have to be in a mindset to realize the mother is too. This is a new, no matter if this is a 10th child, this is a new child. This is a new experience. My body has changed all over again, once again. So I see more parallel in that when it comes to postpartum, just because with the postpartum, you do focus more solely on the mom. It's like, I'm taking care of the mom right now. Whoever got the baby got the baby. So that's where I see the connection at more there. That's why I'm actually hesitant on being a postpartum doula, because I know right now I'm baby crazy. So I definitely want to train myself to focus more on the mother, because I did suffer postpartum depression, so I know exactly how that is and how that feels to feel, excluded as a person. So that's where I must see the parallel at.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I thought you brought up a very good point. When it comes to finding those parallels, whenever I think of like it takes a village, I think of this idea of collectivism that's often associated with communities of color. When you think about African Americans and our ancestry and folks of the diaspora, anybody like that, our indigenous brothers and sisters, there's this idea of working together. And I feel like postpartum doulas and doulas in general take on that role of being part of that village to ensure that not only the baby is good, like you were saying, but those parents or that new birthing person is good. So thinking about all those different things when we think about those parallels is extremely important. We have a couple questions coming in. Continue to have those questions pop up. Well, we're almost done with this set of questions, but want to make sure that our audience is super engaged. So just definitely continue to pop those questions in, and we'll answer them at the end of this conversation. And I guess I want to move on to the next question. And I want to know, like, we're talking about doulas and midwives, and we think about folks that identify as women at like the forefront of that, or, people of color specifically being at the forefront of assisting and giving and helping with giving birth. How do you think this shift occurred from, being those folks at the center of it to a white male at one point being considered the father of gynecology? How did this happen and why did this happen? Because clearly there was some kind of misstep, something. What are your thoughts on that? And I'll leave that to anybody to answer. It's a bit of a heavy question. So if you just take a second, y'all, just hop in when you can. It's a very heavy question.
So when it comes to that, I definitely want to hit back on, talking about the granny midwives and how they were well respected, women from the South and, in rural areas, in impoverished areas, they were able to provide care to women who didn't have any other way to receive that care. And, there were counselors, there were breastfeeding consultants, postpartum, they were doing it all, when it wasn't available. And I think about the fact that, after doing more research about it, finding out that they were devalued, they were seen as less than, their care wasn't regarded as anything. And in that, era, they were trying to get these women to go to the hospital. And, when they went to the hospital, they weren't receiving the same kind of care that they were receiving at home, the same kind of care that generations upon generations have received. And when you think about that, it was also a fear tactic, because if we think about the father of gynecology became the father because he abused Black bodies. And he mutilated and defiled Black bodies without care or consent or anything. And there hasn't to this day been any, retribution for those acts. And it's not regarded that every medical facility should give honor to the Black body for the medical advances that we have today. So when I think about that, I think about how it's hard to see that the medical field of gynecology was built off the bodies of Black people. And now they're still, defiling and mutilating and killing Black people. So if we see that, we're not seeing too much change there, if we're looking at that real underlying foundation of things, and it's unfortunate. And that's why, seeing people of color going into the community and becoming these medical, consultants, becoming these community health workers, becoming doulas, becoming midwives. It's important to break down these molds, these barriers that have continued to only get worse over the years. I think earlier it was said that we need to look at, I think Jaden, you said this, that we need to look at other countries as the blueprint, because we surely don't have it. And when we think about it, about 80% of the world uses midwives for birth, and they have done for years. Yet we in this country, literally majority of the time, use obstetricians. And that even looking at getting into midwives, and midwives are becoming more frequent, it's still seen as a taboo. And there's still so many people who don't know what doulas are. So those are things that I'm kind of thinking about, that it is unfortunate that a white person in a white coat is seen as more respected and more regarded and taken more seriously, than other forms of care. And that's something that we have to continue to change.
I agree, definitely. Thank you, Shavette. Does anybody else have any comments or perspective on this topic?
I feel like Shavette said it nicer than what I would, but
you're gonna say it beautifully. It's already beautiful.
My mindset on it is, the reason why it is simply because of racism. I don't know another way to put it, honestly. It's the way my mind works around it is this way because they can't, when I say they, I mean people that are racist, they can't put around their mind Black women, people of color in general, being in control of their own bodies, being in control of bringing another life into this world. And it's just, they just couldn't take it. Like, it was just, that's what I meant by nicer. I feel like mine is a really nice response. But that's how I feel about it. I just feel like they couldn't take over the thought of us being in control of our own body, being in control of another life. And it goes from there. It goes from controlling when you have a baby, how you have a baby, how many babies you have, you can afford this baby, the housing of this baby. It's just controlled all the way around, starting from when you can have a baby. It's as soon, if you're 25 with 3 kids, automatically they're trying to push you to get your tubes tied. But it was like, what if I want a big family? And it's like, no, that's not good. We're not going to do that. Let's end that type of thing. So that's why I feel like that was a transition happened, because even though, like Shavette said, they may say that the granny midwives were not any benefit or weren't doing what they're supposed to do, they knew deep down that they gave that empowerment that was needed to know, like, oh, I know my body. I know I can have this baby. I know, what can get in my way, what can't get in my way. I know what choices to make, what choices not to make. And instead, it was like, no, I need to make these choices for you. You need to listen to me and listen to me only. So I think it was just mainly by that racism and that fear, because that's what racism is. It's just fear of not knowing. And by you not being able to control everything, I feel like it was just a snowball effect. And now that's where we are. Not now, but it's gotten a little better, slightly, but it's definitely room for improvement.
And just going off of that, like, just to be very clear, this has the desire to control and manipulate and extend violence towards Black and Indigenous folks has been the case since slavery, and has looked and evolved and been shaped in a whole bunch of different ways in the more recent centuries. But this is just another tactic, I would say, by primarily white, wealthy men who are in power and want to keep it that way.
I definitely agree. You guys hit the nail on the head. I was thinking very, very much the same, but you also said it so beautifully. And when we're talking about doulas and midwives, and we're talking about anti-racist work, what are your thoughts on that? I think you guys kind of already discussed it, but this is the last question I have. So how do you think this work is a form of resistance, as well as anti-racist work? And you all can go crazy, because I think y'all attendees, I think this is the question, y'all.
I think to me, it just shows the way that we know, like, we got each other. It's about our people showing up for our people. And we know we can't rely on these institutions. We can't rely on government necessarily to care for our people. So it's like, I'm gonna make sure that no one I know and no one around me, no one I have access to is gonna give birth alone if that's not the experience that they want. And I'm gonna do everything in my power to make sure someone has the safest, best, most joyful birthing experience that they can possibly have. And it's just, yeah, it's an active act of resistance against institutionalization and privatization and medicalization of what has always been such a communal, sacred experience for our people. So I think it's very much directly an explicit act of anti-racism.
I think it's because of knowledge as well. Like, knowledge is power, no matter how you look at it. And the fact that as a doula, you have your clients question their providers, that you have your clients make sure they interview their providers, because it's so set up now that the provider is doing a job for you. Like, I'm doing this for you type of thing. So I'm doing you a favor. Like, I don't have to do this. But that's not how it works. You are hiring them. You have the options and the choices. And by us educating them, letting them know, like, hey, what the doctor told you is not your only option, that's going against them already. Like, that's an automatic fight against whatever they decide. If a client comes to me to tell me that, oh, my doctor said I have to have a C-section because I had one 4 years ago, I'm looking there like, no, you don't. Like, let's do some research. Let me tell you this, and that, and inform to you why, and then take this back to them. And then now it's a problem because apparently the provider is not doula friendly anymore. Or they feel like, and I feel like that's another thing, because we don't have the college credentials or things like that. We're not looked at as educated. And that's why it's frowned upon for a doula to tell you otherwise than what your doctor is telling you. And that's not the case. We put in the time research as much as they do, if not more. So I think that is really what the fight is against each other, which I wish it wasn't the case. I wish it was all, we're here for the client strictly or for that patient strictly, but it's not, unfortunately.
I think you both hit it on the head. I think about the fact that if we go back to looking at midwives, obstetricians, OBs, and doulas, you talked about earlier, Nala, that we are there to serve that client. That is our one client. We're not on rotation. We're not on a 12 to 24-hour shift. We're not there from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. serving multiple people on the OB floor. We're here to serve that one client in that moment and tend to all of their needs. And we can't say the same for any other profession in the field of OB, midwives, and doulas. So I think that makes an impact that we're there to serve. We're there to provide that education. We're there to not make this the business of giving birth. Because at the end of the day, when you have to look at it on the outside, it is a business. Get this client in, get this out, get this baby out, do this, do that, you know what I mean? And then you get a big medical bill at the end of the day. We are there to stop all that and focus on the event, this everyday miracle of giving birth. And I think that that's really the anti-racist work, is being able to say, you know what, if you don't want that medical intervention, you do not have to have it. And no amount of fear-mongering, pressure, attitude, or feeling less than in your own experience is going to make a difference. You have that autonomy, you have that strength. And we as doulas are here to uplift you and give you that opportunity to do what you require. And I think that is just so amazing, to be able to tell a client, you can say no. You don't need that. if you don't want it, you don't require that, that's fine. We can make sure that that doesn't happen. You don't need to be on that right now. We don't need to rush the situation. I think that there's so much rushing within the room. It makes the client feel so overwhelmed because it's like, well, this person's telling me this and this person's telling me that, and I can't even trust my own thoughts. And so we have to break that down, because that is, implicit bias. That's what, oh, you don't know what you need. I've been in this field for X amount of years. I know what you need. I know what's best for you. And really challenging that to say, no, the client knows what's best for them. That birthing person knows what's best for them. They know their body. They're the ones experiencing this right now. We're supposed to be the ones to support. And so that's where we're bringing in that resistance to say, let's stop and really think about the birthing person and what they need at this moment in time. And don't intimidate them. Give them the opportunity to do what they need to get done and be who they need to be in that moment.
Thank you so much for everyone's opinion. And Jaden, if you wanted to add anything, please feel free.
I just wanted to add and kind of like add together what everybody said. Doula work just really just takes the power directly out the hands of the OB and just puts the power back to the birthing person. It centers them and makes sure that they're heard during their experience. Because in a hospital setting, typically the OB would make the decisions for you, whether that be like what positions you can push in, the use of Pitocin, when you're going to get it, and like all the other interventions, or even really just like your induction date down to that. And having a doula present is just a form of resistance, because you understand like you have choices and your voice is valuable in your experience, because it is your experience.
It's such a great point, Jaden, a great way to kind of bring that back around. And we do have some questions in the chat box. We only have about 8 minutes left because I knew this would happen, but that's fine. We're going to start asking some questions. And Claire's going to help me out a little bit too. There may be some comments in the chat too, Claire, if you could check those and check for any kind of raised hands or anything like that. That'll be awesome. So to get started, we're going to ask the first question from our attendee, Shannon Walker. She wanted to know, are there doulas to help support women, specifically women of color, experiencing infertility and considering or going through infertility treatments? And I think you guys did kind of touch on that a little bit when I think Maya spoke about how the spectrum in terms of what doulas can do has expanded to beyond just during birth, but other avenues to really cater to that person's needs at the time and the support that they possibly just need at that moment in time, whether it's before, during, after, or you're in the process of thinking about it. So that's kind of an answer right there for that. If anybody wants to add anything else, I'm open to. Okay, cool. All right. So we answered that question live, y'all. This webinar thing is kind of cool. Okay. All right. The second question is from Linda Green. That's actually my mom, y'all. She wants to know, where and how do you train to be a doula? Like, how do you search out possibly wanting to get that training so that you can become certified? Like, how does that work? And anybody can hop in and answer.
I'll just start off by saying, I think this is a little bit of a complicated response because from my experience, at least, there's kind of a lot of different entities and organizations that have their own certificates, and you don't have to be certified to be a doula, but there are organizations that you can certify with. DONA is sort of thought of as like one of the most popular ones. And if you just like do a Google search, DONA will come up. But from my personal experience and just things that I've known about them, historically, it's been like very white centered. And I've heard that they've kind of pushed back against the folks who are trying to change that and get folks to be working from an anti-racist framework and standpoint. So I personally would not recommend DONA, though they are one of the organizations that certify folks. But there's a lot of different entities depending on where you are. I know there's National Black Doulas Association. I've heard of Ancient Song Doula, which I think is based in New York. But it can kind of be tricky to navigate because folks claim to certify for different things. But again, you don't need to be certified to to be a good advocate and support birthing people. But definitely curious if y'all have other recommendations for where folks can look who are interested.
Yeah, and I think,
I'm
oh,
currently,
sorry, go
sorry.
ahead, Nala. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, another one that I'm currently taking now is, it's birth advocacy doula training. It's the acronym BADT, and it's queer based. Like it's really informative about as far as the outlook of everyone. And they do have a full spectrum training. But the biggest thing when looking for training is you wanted to make sure it is something that relates and connects to you. Like Maya was saying with Donna, like don't get me wrong, it's great to have that beside your name, but especially as a person of color, they're not going to give you the information that you need. It's a different world having a client of color compared to having a white client. So it's things like that that you want to make sure no matter where you decide to get trained or certified, that they're going to touch key points that are uncomfortable and make it known that being a doula is not an easy profession. You're not sitting here kissing, hugging babies and rubbing on cute bellies. Like it's a real life thing where it can be a mental drain, and you just want to make sure that you have someone that's training you that is realistic and honest, open about how it is to be in this field.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through all the questions. Nala and Maya, thank you for sharing those resources. And there's certain folks, I think some doulas are actually attendees as well. And so they're dropping their information, not their information, but their training information. Oh, thank you, Charity. Thank you. Is your name Jamila or Jamelia? I don't know. We might have the same name, but they're dropping their different training resources in there. Thank you to those doulas and midwives that are actually attendees right now. We recognize you, we appreciate you, we love you all. So thank you. And let's see, next question. And I think if you all could drop this information in the chat as well. Shannon wants to know about how to find the best doula for you. So like resources related to those spectrum doulas. So if she's looking for a doula related to, postpartum care or related to infertility, like where could she go specifically? Thank you, Charity. She's an ambassador for the National Black Doulas Association, and they have a great training. So if you all have those resources, Shannon, what we can do is they can send those to me, and I can definitely email that information to everybody, and we'll go from there for that. So thank you, Shannon. Another question, Shannon, you are on a roll. Shannon has another question, y'all. Okay, that's fine. All right. I was wondering if you could talk more about the relationship and partnership between doulas and the birthing person's doctor. And I think this is related to another question that was asked later on about, have you had like positive experiences with that birthing person's doctor, or has there always been opposition? So if you guys or anybody would want to speak on that, that would be great.
So I'll say I have had opposition when it comes to working with health professionals as far as nurses. So I've had nurses who feel as though doulas impose on their role as being a nurse for a birthing person. And it's not necessarily true, because nurses have their job as medical professionals and we are support people. And so kind of understanding that the differential there, I've had, people, nurses said, I've been in the field for 30 years. You think you're going to come here and do my job? And, it's really hard being in that situation, because you want to remain calm. You want to remain in the room and not be kicked out to support your client. But you're also dealing with the, the animosity, maybe even the jealousy of the health professional. And in those moments, you really have to say, I hear your struggle, but I'm here for my client. I'm here to provide the best I can for my client. And I'm here to advocate for her. And that's my role. So I have had times where I have to talk to a professional and get my point across. And even in that moment, the nurse kicked me out and I had to talk to the midwife to get back in, because the midwife had the original birth plan for my client and was able to bring me back in the room. So I've had moments like that, and it's very unfortunate. So I'm trying to break down those barriers. And now we have hospital systems that are allowing doulas to go in, that are allowing doula programs and clinicals to be in practice. So I'm hoping that we can erase those things from happening.
And I've also seen it, I haven't attended many births, but I've also seen it work out really well. I don't instantly think, oh, doula opposition, like automatically that role is just inherently in opposition. That's not how I view it. I think at best, it's just another part of the puzzle. And again, that person is really just there for the birthing person, and they're communicating with everyone. Everyone understands everyone's role. And I have seen that done well. So I hope folks don't think it like is inherently in opposition to the other providers.
Awesome. Especially with, I think I get excited when I hear about places like New York City. I know that there was some recent, um, uh, I'm losing my words right now too, but some recent kind of, I don't want to say rules, but something was done in New York where I don't know if the mayor or one of the leaders actually recognized doulas and midwives as being something and people that were necessary during the birthing experience of others, and even thinking about providing additional funding for those doulas so that they can definitely do the work they need to be doing and be compensated for that work too. So hopefully with that, there will be more conversations around those relationships between medical professionals and doulas, because clearly they are doing just as much amazing work as those doctors are doing, or those OBs are doing. All right, we have some more questions. There's a lot of questions popping up now. Dawn wanted to know more about intimidation that parents experience when it's related to medical or refusing medical interventions. And if you all want to actually, if one of you all want to answer that in the chat, that would be helpful, just so that we can get through some more of the questions that are popping up. But if anybody wanted to say anything now related to that, she just wanted to know, I guess, the experiences of parents when they decide not to take on medical care. How can, I guess we can rephrase it like, um, how can one respond to that if they are, saying that they do not want that care and the medical professional is possibly being unprofessional?
I just want to say real quick, the best way to go about it is agree to disagree. Especially in the midst of it. It's very rare that your provider, like say if you don't want to do vaccines with your baby while you're there, it's very rare that your provider is gonna go and check in with the pediatrician to make sure that was done. So if you tell them like, oh yeah, I have an appointment set to such day, which may be true because just a general checkup to get it taken care of with my pediatrician, then that's it. That's all they literally need to hear. That's it. As far as other things going to get a little more complicated, like the PICU and getting some of that cord blood can be a little bit more challenging. But there, just to make the short answer, there's a lot of research that's out there and it's available to you to help you know how to go about those things without them ready to call CPS on you.
Thank you so much, Nala. I hope that helped, Dawn. I really do. And then the next question I have, wanting to know other kind of wellness tools that are used in your practice. So as a doula, what kind of other methods do you use, whether you bring in yoga or massage? What are some things that you all use? If you use any other kind of tools or methods when it comes to, I'm not sure if she means like preparing for birth or postpartum. I'm not completely sure, but if you do use anything or have a specific method, would you want to share that with us?
Me personally, I'm really big on your birthing space. I actually have included in my personal business in one of my services is that I design a birth space. It's filled with your favorite essential oils, of course, choice of music, affirmations, any photos that you want to have. I love to include plants just to give them that spirit energy of living and something new and growth. So that's one of the techniques that I do use in order to help besides the actual physical benefit.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. We are.
Oh, you're muted, Jamila.
Thank you, Maya. I would say thank you to you for answering some questions in the chat. I'm so sorry. We had so many great kind of questions and comments popping up. Thank you, Maya, for answering that question. The attendee said thank you too. And just so many great comments and things like that. But we have to wrap up, unfortunately. One day we'll do a 2-hour one. How about that? Charity, who's also a doula, is in the chat having some great comments popping in there. So if you guys want to take a second and read those, that'll be awesome. I'm going to go ahead and just wrap it up. Thank you all so much. This is actually our last Stand Against Racism event for 2022, our last virtual event. And I think this was the best way to go out because selfishly, this is my favorite thing to talk about now. So I'm excited that I was able to kind of lock in with the panelists, with Maya, Shavette, Jaden, and Nala, to tap into their wisdom and knowledge that they have. They're such brilliant folks. So I'm excited to know that I'm connected with them. Please connect with them. If you all want to drop any of your doula services information, your websites, please just drop those in the chat if you have any questions for them. Again, thank you to our sponsors too, Google Fiber and Corning, for supporting this work. And we'll continue to do this work, especially knowing a lot of the things that have transpired over the past 24 hours when it comes to the Supreme Court's possible decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. So conversations on reproductive rights and reproductive justice are imperative in this moment, especially when we think about folks of color, specifically those that identify as women and the birthing folks of color, so that they have the right to make the decisions that are right for them, whether they want a doula or if they're making the decision personally to have an abortion or whatever type of care they need that's best for them. So it's important that we keep this conversation moving and going forward. Shout out to Claire, our marketing and tech magic magician person. She's behind the scenes and we appreciate her and we want to show her lots of love and give her good vibes. As this is her last virtual event with YWCA, we appreciate her so much and all the work that she's done. And thank you to the attendees for continuing to keep the chat super lively, asking great questions, and just being awesome. And stay tuned for our next racial justice and advocacy event. We will be reading The Water Dancer for a book club. So if you want to join us, join us. You will get an email tomorrow with more information, including a resource guide, as well as a link to this actual, this amazing conversation we had today, as well as if you want to register for the book club in June. So I look forward to seeing y'all again. Thank y'all again to my awesome panelists, and y'all have a great rest of your evening. Stay safe and stay informed. All right, bye.